I'm a third-generation farmer from north central Montana. My wife, Charlotte, and I have the incredible opportunity of farming the same land that my grandfather and grandmother homesteaded and that my folks worked for 35 years. I've been working on the farm since I was very young, and from the age of 8, I knew I wanted to be a farmer. But my parents were insistent that I work hard in school and that I pursue a degree, even though agriculture was in my blood. They knew that a degree would give me greater opportunity both on and off the farm. My mother in particular had an unbreakable faith in the power of public education. So I went into college, and after college, I graduated and got a degree, started teaching in the same elementary school that I attended as a child. And while my calling as a farmer pulled me away from my time as a public school teacher in rural America, now, to be honest with you, the fact is I could make more money in one day of processing meat than I could in a week of teaching school, but that's another problem. Nonetheless, I left formal public education classroom, but it remained a key part of my life because I knew education was important. My parents instilled that in me, so I ran for the school board and got elected. I have been involved in public education my entire life, as a student, as a teacher, as a parent, as a school board member, as a state senator, as a grandfather, and now as a U.S. senator. I've seen the positive impact that good education can have on folks' lives, and I've seen how our system has failed too many kids. Last year, Denise Juneau, Montana's superintendent of public instruction, put out a report on Graduation Matters. Nearly 80% of the male inmates in Montana's prison system are high school dropouts. 80% of the male inmates in Montana's prison are high school dropouts. Nearly 3/4 of the women in Montana jails are high school dropouts. Superintendent Juneau estimated that Montana could combine crime reduction savings and additional revenue of over $19 million annually if we just graduated 5% more kids and incarcerated fewer of them. Nationally, these stakes are just as high. According to some figures, over 80% of the incarcerated population are high school dropouts. It is true that over 8,000 Americans drop out of high school each and every day. You can see how quickly the cost of incarceration will add up, even if many stay out of trouble and some go back and get their GED years later. But it's not only the question of incarceration. The only jobs left within reach of a high school dropout are almost always going to be minimum wage or close to it. That perpetuates the cycle of poverty. So every American ought to know what we're up against. And I know that what we do here this week with Every Child Achieves Act will affect millions of American families for years to come. For the past few months, the Appropriations Committee has been working on bills that impact everything from our national defense to veterans, to agriculture, to access to our public lands. I have been highly critical of where this majority thinks we should spend money and where it thinks we don't need to invest. My colleagues on the Appropriations Committee deserve a lot of credit for doing the best they can, but the end result is still unacceptable. They have underfunded care for veterans by over $850 million compared to what the VA says it needs to keep up with the increased number of veterans accessing the VA. They have rejected efforts to make Head Start a full-day, full-year learning initiative, and by freezing Head Start funding, they risked kicking more than 12,000 kids out of Head Start despite its successes. I've already told you about prison populations and education. It is a direct connection. And they've cut $500 million out of clean water projects. Meanwhile, they've funneled $40 billion of borrowed money into an off-the-books account used for overseas military operations. This week, as we work to reform elementary and secondary education, to ensure that our kids and our grandkids are prepared for the challenges of this worldwide economy in which we live, we simply cannot afford to shortchange their future. That doesn't just mean providing the framework that will guide our nation's 100,000 school districts as they work to improve education. that our students receive. It also means letting them make decisions for themselves. If schools aren't teaching well, they are accountable to school boards. If school boards are hiring bad teachers or misapplying resources, they're accountable to their voters. And I can tell you as a former school board member, they are accountable to their voters. But we also have to provide them with the resources they need to succeed. This is an investment that we must make. Almost everyone in this body agrees that education is the single best investment that we can make to ensure that folks are able to climb the economic ladder and get out of poverty. Well, I don't agree with everything in the Every Child Achieves Act. I can tell you that it is certainly a step in the right direction. Most importantly, this bill eliminates adequate yearly progress, known as AYP, and moves us away from some of the failed high-stakes testing that we've come to know, and the chairman and ranking member need to be applauded for that. No Child Left Behind assumed that all students were the same and that success in the classroom meant passing a standardized test. We all know that's simply not the case. No Child Left Behind aimed to hold teachers and administrators solely responsible for the performance of their students. And punishment for low performance was rendered in the halls of the Department of Education here in Washington, D.C. Well, yes, I can tell you teachers and administrators must be held accountable. But much of that achievement gap is tied to things out of the hands of those teachers and administrators. It is tied to what happens outside the classroom. Students' lives, both inside the classroom and out, are significantly different depending on the community and the home in which they live. And one of the single biggest factors that impacts students' lives is poverty. If we do not address that issue, then this well-intentioned bill will not have the desired effects. If we do not recognize that urban poverty and rural poverty are very different things, then we'll fail to keep the promise that in America, any kid could grow up to be in the United States Senate, or to be successful in business or in the arts. Quite simply, if we're going to hold teachers and students accountable without addressing the root of some of the inequities in our public schools, then we're not addressing one of the most basic problems that our nation and our schools face. Using a single formula to grade the nation's 100,000 schools didn't work, especially when folks in Washington expected schools to change overnight, adding so much pressure to reform that some teachers and students alike dreaded going to school. We lost a lot of good teachers. Senator Alexander and Senator Murray's bill acknowledges that Washington doesn't have all the answers when it comes to educating our kids. It puts more control in the hands of the states and those local school boards. For example, under No Child Left Behind, all 100,000 schools in this country were subject to the same regulation for graduation rates. Under that regulation, schools can only count students who graduate with a diploma in 4 years. School districts don't get credit for students who graduate in 5, or if they earn a GED. Oftentimes, students who take more than 4 years to graduate have personal or family issues that prevent them from graduating on time. States would have to beg permission from the Department of Education to count that fifth-year graduates. And if the department chose to accept those graduates, it would tell the states how much weight those students would count toward the school's assessment. Under the Every Child Achieves Act, states will no longer have to apply to count that fifth-year graduate, and they can determine on their own how to weigh those students when assessing graduation rates. This bill also builds on the Schools of Promise initiative that has worked well in Montana to put some of our poorest performing schools on the right path. Under the leadership of Superintendent Juneau, the communities that are home to Montana's 5 lowest rated public schools have received support to attract and retain better teachers and to encourage community members to be more involved in the education of their children. That model, which empowers districts and schools to get better and hire better, is being strengthened by the Every Child Achieves Act. While this bill can and should go further to place more power at the local level, we've taken a good first step in its potential to do even better. I recently paid a visit to Busby, Montana, on the border of the Northern Cheyenne Crow Indian Reservation. Beautiful country, surrounded by rolling hills. Busby is so small that if you blink by driving, you could miss it. But Busby is the home to one of Montana's 3 Bureau of Indian Education schools. It is easy to see how America's broken promise to our tribal communities really is when you go to Busby. The school has few resources. Science teacher doesn't have any working microscopes. The teachers often cut pages out of their instruction manuals to make photocopies for their students, and the school needs maintenance. While the scene at many BIE schools would drive you to tears, the public schools that educate over 90% of our Native American students are also in serious need of support. Over the past decade, American students are the only group that have not seen improvements in reading and math. In fact, the achievement gap in math has actually widened over that time. Native American students are also the most likely to skip school or drop out and the least likely to go to college. And that's why last week the Senate passed my amendments to restore 4 grant programs that could help improve education in Indian country if they get funded. My amendment allows schools and colleges to train teachers to understand Native American culture so they're better equipped to help those students succeed, those Native American students. It preserves fellowship programs for Native American students to get greater hands-on experience through their degree. It protects gifted and talented programs to better address the needs of bright young Native American students, and it maintains support for adult literacy and GED programs in Native American communities. Those initiatives, part of Title VII, have never been funded, but they have a major positive impact for Native Americans across the country if we could find the money to fund them. Last week's bipartisan vote showed that there's real support for these initiatives, and we should provide them with adequate resources. Additionally, this bill includes strong steps toward native language instruction. It's a very good thing, because we know that when Indian kids learn in their native language, they do better in school and carry their history and tradition onto future generations, and they graduate at a higher rate. Another important step we can take, one that I hear about often when meeting with parents, teachers, and administrators back home, is reducing the annual federal testing requirement. Because right now, under No Child Left Behind, we're testing our kids to death. Did you know that a student will take 17 federally mandated tests by the time they graduate high school? 17. Now, I met with some 4th and some 6th grade students, as well as their teachers and parents, about how much testing the Fed requires. Now, as you well know, 4th and 6th grade students usually tell it like it is. There's not a political agenda behind when they ask you a question or tell you the way they see it. So when I asked how much testing is the right amount, one bright young girl replied, "I don't know, but I can tell you now it's too much." Teacher told me that they were spending in 4th grade over 4 weeks a year testing. Let me say that again. A teacher told me they were spending over 4 weeks a year testing. That's 4 weeks out of a year that takes away from instruction time, where kids could be learning. The level of testing that's currently required is choking out creativity, innovation, and taking away from our students' ability to learn. So I've offered an amendment to replace that current annual testing with fewer tests. Instead of taking federally mandated tests every year, students would be required to take 1 test in elementary, 1 test in middle school, 1 test in high school. If states want to test their students more, they can. If school boards want to test their students more, they can. But like the young girl in Billings, right now, we're doing too much. My goal, and the goal of many in this body, is to give a greater voice to the state and local community leaders to determine how best to educate the next generation. This bill, as drafted, puts us on that path. It is a chance to leave a better future for our country by making sure that every child, from the best school in the biggest city to the poorest Indian reservation in Montana, has a chance to succeed. And our schools should not be designed as data warehouses where we collect statistics on every student in America. Instead, we should be making sure that our students love to learn so that they continue to learn even after they graduate and enter the workforce. We should make sure that they have the same appreciation for education that my mother did. That's what we should be investing in. and that's who we should be investing for. Mr. Chairman, I once again want to thank the Senator Alexander and Senator Murray for their work on this bill. I look forward to making this bill better through the amendment process, not worse, so that we have a good bill to vote on, hopefully at the end of this week.